Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I am bringing you week 29 of my 2019 reads. This week I managed to finish 2 books, which made me very happy because both of them were from my July TBR, meaning I am making progress on my Hugo reading. The first book that I finished was Record of a Spaceborne Few by Becky. This is the 3rd book in the Wayfarer series, and it is nominated for a Hugo this year. This book was really interesting. Each book in the Wayfarer series takes place in the same universe, but it doesn't really follow the same characters in each story. In this book, we're looking at the fleet, or the Exodus fleet, and it's basically these spaceships that are generation ships that house a lot of humans. And so these are the humans who left Earth, and they have been, searching for a new home, sort of. There are humans who went to Mars, things like that, but this is a different group. And this group of humans is very idealistic. They have created these generation ships where, there's rules about everybody will have a home, everybody will be fed, and everybody will participate. So it's kind of like a little bit of a socialist or even communist dream where everybody is contributing and everybody is participating. And in this book, it works. They make everything work, and they are very good at recycling and reusing and kind of having this self-contained society where they don't rely on a lot of outside things because they were in these generation ships that had to be self-sufficient. They've created a very interesting culture for themselves. There's a lot of different rituals and beliefs and ways of being that are involved in being part of the fleet. But what has happened is that in the past couple of decades, from when the story takes place, that Exodus fleet has, really become integrated with a lot of the wider group of different sapient beings, and that has changed things. It has introduced a lot of new trade and things where before it was all of a barter system. Now there's actual money that is involved with doing anything that is integrated with the outside universe, and it's changing the culture. And so there's a lot of focus in this book about how that culture is changing. The story itself follows multiple different characters in the fleet, and it sort of starts out a little disparate. So when I was reading this, I read the first 20% back sometime in May, and I put the book down to focus on some other things, and I never really came back to it, partially just because I think it started out not as gripping as I would like it. So it was just kind of each person who was featured in the story, there was no connection between them. So it felt like reading a bunch of different short stories that were interleaved. However, when I picked the book up this time, those separate stories all kind of wove together. So they were very separate threads, and then they sort of all wove together into this really beautiful story, actually. I definitely cried at this book. I thought it was really moving, and I loved a lot of the themes that this touched on. It touched on a lot of themes of belonging, a lot of themes of community, of culture, of history, of just sort of humanity, really. And there was a big focus as well on sort of what does it mean to be part of a community, to be part of a family, and how do we honor that? And when somebody dies, how do we honor that? So one of the main characters is basically an undertaker. It's somebody who deals with bodies when they have died, and they are kind of recycled. They go back to the earth in a sense, although it's a garden in a spaceship, not the real earth. And there's a real focus on what does it mean to die and to have your body sort of return to the earth in a sense. And that was a really powerful message. I think I got a lot out of it, especially because I really like Andrea at Infinite Text, who I will link below, the way that she talks about death. So she is very interested in the subject, and she has read a lot of different books about death practices. And that was really interesting to see a novel address a lot of those issues after I've heard her talk about it, because it's not necessarily a topic I personally know a ton about, but it was just very moving. I think that for me, the story itself and a lot of the themes it addressed were really beautiful, but I did find that the beginning was kind of a little disjointed, and it came all together really, really nicely in sort of like the middle and towards the end, but then at the very end it kind of split out again. And I just wasn't as much of a fan when it wasn't a cohesive story. I would have liked it to be a cohesive story for more of the book. So I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. The other book that I finished this week was Raven Stratagem by Yoon Lee, which is the second book in the Machineries of Empire series. This book itself is not nominated for a Hugo, but the third book in the series, Revenant Gun, is. And so I'm hoping that I will get to that really soon, because voting for the Hugos ends on July 31st. So I've got a little bit of time left, and I think I can make it. In any case, I was very pleased to have finished this book. It's a really interesting story, so I don't want to give away too much of the plot line, because a lot of that rests on what happens in the first book. This is very much a continuation of the first book, Nine Fox Gambit, but it is a really neat story that, again, it focuses on very epic military SF in this universe where religion plays a big role, where religion and the calendar that they follow with the observances and the sometimes ritual sacrifices and things that are done is what powers their technology. Their technology is built on that. And that is just a really fascinating premise. I like it quite a bit, especially because there's a huge focus on belonging and conformity and what it means to be part of a group where if you don't conform, the society literally like stops working. You know, your technology stops working if people don't believe. And that's fascinating. That's a really interesting way to look at world building. So this book really focuses again on those themes, and there's so much of political intrigue and military strategy and battles and assassinations and body doubles and all of that really fascinating action epic military sci-fi type of stuff, as well as these very cool themes of belonging and also of power structures. There's a big focus on power structures and obedience to those who are above you, and what it means if you go against that, if you rebel against that. There's an idea in the military of something called a crash hawk. And a crash hawk is somebody who doesn't obey those above them, and they're very much ostracized. So I think that the themes in this book are super good. I also really liked the way that the storyline played out, but I don't want to go into the details of that because it really rests on the first book too much. But I think that overall, I'm going to give my rating first and then talk about why. Overall, I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. But this is a very temporary rating for me. This book is something that I started in May. I started at the end of May, and I started it right when I was getting extremely sick. I got just the worst cold, and I was out for 2 weeks. I was so sick. If you go back and watch any of my videos that I made around that time, my voice is just so gravelly because it was a very throat-based sickness. Anyway, so I got very sick, and I got about halfway through this book while I was really sick, and then I realized I had to put it down, because even though I was aware and awake enough to read and comprehend what I was reading, I was not able to emotionally engage. I was just way too out of it. And so even though looking back on it, I remember what I read, I remember the actions that occurred, I was not engaged in the book. I sort of didn't care. I was just reading because there was nothing else that I was capable of doing at that point. And I'm glad that I put it down and came back to it now, because I picked it up this week and immediately within 2 pages, I was thoroughly engrossed in the book. I loved it. Immediately, I found it super engaging and so compelling and just emotionally very, very, good and moving. And I loved this second half. And that put me at the end of reading it in a weird spot where I didn't know how to rate it, because the second half for me was a 5. But that first half, even though I remember what happened, I was not super engaged in it. And I can't give the book as a whole, like this reading experience, 5 stars, because it wasn't a 5-star read for me, not the whole thing. But that rests less on the book and more on me. And so I did a lot of soul searching and thinking about, how do I rate something like this? Where I know that it had to do with me and the, how sick I was, but at the same time, that just wasn't my experience reading it. And I think that it's very interesting in general to try to think about why we rate things the way that we do. We might intuitively feel that something is a 5 or 4 or 3 or 2 or 1 stars. But when we have to kind of justify it, it gets a little weird. And I know that there are definitely some people who are a lot more objective in the way that they rate. Njeri from ONYX Pages, who I will link below, has a 7 cowrie shell system, and she breaks down into a rubric sort of what she wants to rate books on. Things like, does it address problems that she thinks are important? Does it have good representation of people that she thinks are important? All those sorts of things. And that, I think, is a really smart way to do an objective rating system, where you make a rubric and you say, what is it that I care about? What is it that I want to rate books on? My rating system, on the other hand, is a lot more laissez-faire, and it is based purely on my enjoyment of books. So I made a video a while back talking about kind of the way that I rate and read and think about books, so I will link that below if anybody is curious. But the essence of it is that I rate books based on my engagement in the story and in the world. A 5-star for me is not like, this is the most amazing book ever written. It's, I was thoroughly engaged the entire book. There was nothing that brought me out of it. And kind of every half point down I go is in some way something that brought me out of the story. So maybe there was too much violence, or maybe there were issues that I had with the characters or with the themes, or maybe the writing wasn't as good, those sorts of things that just bring me out of the story. But for me, a 5-star read is that I was thoroughly engaged the entire book. Which is why, for this book, for Raven's Stratagem, I can't say that. I can't say that I was thoroughly engaged the entire book, even though I feel like if I had read it at another time, I would have given it a 5. And then I was just thinking, so often when I read books, because my rating system is so subjective, it's such an interaction between me and the book. So often it's going to be a rating that is related not just to the book itself, not objectively, but really to who I am at the moment that I read that book. So if anybody's ever had this case where you have like a favorite book from a decade ago, and then you go back and you read it and you go, huh, that was not as good as I remember it. This did not age well. I think that is just that idea that who you are at the time that you read the book makes a difference. So if you change as a person, if your mood changes, if your understanding of something changes, I think all of that really affects the way that you kind of feel about a book. And so anyway, this is a long rambling discussion just about the soul searching that I had to do in creating this 4.5 rating for Raven's Stratagem. My compromise was basically, I don't feel comfortable giving this a 5 because it wasn't a 5 for me, but it was really close. So I gave it a 4.5. And I think that at some point in the future, I should totally reread this book, because I bet it'll be a 5 upon reread when I am in a different place. Anyway, so that wraps up my week 29 reads. If anybody else has thoughts about rating systems and about how to rate books when you're in a weird place when you read it, I would be so interested in hearing that, so please do leave a comment below. Also, if anybody else has read the books that I've read this week, please let me know what you thought. And if you are voting in the Hugos and you're making videos about that, let me know. I really want to see. I think that Sush is almost done as well. I think he also has one more book to go. I have one more book to go, so I think we're going to be able to finish that and hopefully get a discussion video of that up before the month ends. So good luck everybody with your reading, and I will talk to you later.